Hello, everybody. I feel like I am so on top of my game because today we're making a paper piece trivet and it's not even February yet. I feel like I am just so ahead of the game this year so far. But today, y'all, I think you either find yourself in one of four categories, right? You love paper piecing. You absolutely love it. Second category would be that you cannot stand paper piecing. You absolutely do not like it at all. The third category is you've only tried it a couple of times, you're a little intimidated, and you find it confusing, but you kind of really want to learn more about it, right? And the fourth category would be you've never tried it and you're willing to learn all about it, right? So today we are making this super functional, because I'm all about the function this year, at least currently. Super functional paper piece trivet. It's going to measure approximately 12 inches by 12 inches. And I'm going to walk you through each one of the steps. Okay, you can grab the pattern down in the link down in the description box. And we're just going to dive right in and get started. Before I do, I just want to let you know there are several different ways of doing paper piecing. If you have watched many of my paper piecing videos before this one, you might have seen where I actually sew next to the paper fold when doing the piecing, and you can reuse the templates over and over again. I love that because I'm all about reusing the templates. However, I have also found that sometimes it can be really helpful and maybe a little less confusing if you're actually sewing on the paper template, which means once you use the template, it's done. You want to make another project, you have to print off some more templates. But some people find it actually really helpful to sew on the line, and they find it way less confusing. So that's what we're doing today. But you can also do it the other way if that's more functional for you as well, right? There's no right way, there's no wrong way. But today we're sewing through the paper. Let's take a look at this pattern at my cutting table. Okay, going through the pattern, you're going to find some pages that look just like this, right? This page is your tracing templates so that you can pre-cut all of your pieces, right? And just have them all lined up, ready to start sewing. And I find it really much quicker to sew through all of the pieces when I have taken a little bit of time and pre-cut my pieces. So all you're going to do with this page is you're going to cut out the A, B, C, and D templates right on this outside line. They're going to look like this. And then you're going to take this to your fabrics and you're going to pre-cut each one of your pieces. You'll also find right down here, and I like to save mine, there you go. This is where each one of these templates are going to be used in our block, right? We have the A template, which is a little bit smaller. You're going to need 16 of those. And those fabrics are going to go everywhere that you see the little A letter. The C template, you're going to need 4 of those. So you'll get 4 fabrics for that position. The D fabric, you'll need 4. And the B fabric, you're going to need, 8. You're going to need 8 pieces. So you can go ahead and pre-cut all of your pieces. Cut your paper templates out and let me just show you. You'll cut your paper template out. You could stack your 4 pieces or however many you are comfortable stacking, right? You'll put your fabric with the right side facing up, and you'll put your template right on top. And all you're going to do at this point is just go right around your paper template and pre-cut your pieces, right? Now, they don't have to be super exact at this point. You'll notice the inside line, that's going to be the actual finished shape and size of our piece. And you have approximately ½ an inch all the way around that, just to give you a little bit of leeway and make it a little bit easier when we're adding pieces as we go along. So it doesn't have to be super precise. You can be as quick with it as you want, but you'll go ahead and pre-cut each one of your pieces just like that. And then I just like to put the template right on top, make a stack, and then have all my stacks lined up right next to me as we're going along. So go ahead and pre-cut all of your pieces. The next thing you're going to find in this pattern are 8 of these paper foundations, right? Each one of these will be a different section that we're sewing together, and you need to go ahead and separate them and cut them out on this outside line for each one of them. So you're going to end up having 8 little sections that look just like this. When you've cut them out, it's really helpful also to go ahead and pre-fold each one of these 8 paper foundations on the solid line that separates each one of the positions. So the positions are the numbers, right? This will be the first fabric that we add. This will be the second fabric that we add, the third, and the fourth. You'll see a little letter inside of a circle in each one of these positions, and that's actually the paper template that you have used to pre-cut your fabrics with, right? So that's what the little letters are, but the numbers are the order in which we're going to add these pieces. And it's really helpful just to take a flat edge. I really love the add a quarter plus ruler. It is, let's see, 6 inches long. It has a little wedge, right, that helps you when you turn it over to line up the little wedge right on the lines, and then it helps you pre-fold your pieces. But you just need to pre-fold on the line each one of these pieces. And you might think, is it really necessary to take the time to do that for all 8 pieces? And I think if you were to try paper piecing without doing it, you would then realize how useful it is just to take a few minutes and pre-fold those lines. So that's what I've done. I've pre-folded each one of my templates. And if you even look on the back side, you'll see that it's really easy to see the positions on the back side of the paper because of those folds, right? All right, go ahead and do that. And then we're jumping in and we're going to start doing some sewing, right? So I thought for today's tutorial, I would walk you through as I make 2 of these units, right? Let's start with 2 of our paper foundations and our pieces. Now my heart trivet, I'm going to make my hearts scrappy, right, with a lighter background, and I think that'll be really cute. So we have our heart paper foundations here, and they've already been pre-folded. I have my fabrics here. Now, what's really helpful as you're working with doing this method of paper piecing is having a glue stick. This is just an ordinary school washable glue stick, and you're going to find it really helpful to have one of these. Now, the first fabric that we ever add in paper piecing is always going to be with the right side facing up. Okay, so we're going to flip our paper foundations over just like this. And you can just see, because of the lighting, you can just see the paper folds, which really helps us in placing our first fabric, right? We know that our first fabric we're going to add is the larger fabric on this particular project. So what I'm going to do is add a little bit of glue, just a quick little swipe right in that position in the middle of position number 1. And then I'm going to take my fabric for that position and I'm going to just center it right over top with the right side facing up. And we're just going to make sure that the fabric extends beyond the paper edge all the way around. And I'm just going to finger press that, right? Just like that. The fabric is extending beyond the paper edge and I am finger pressing. Now, because I added a ½ inch extra fabric all the way around, there's some grace in placing this first fabric, but there's a little extra. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to flip these fabrics over and the foundation, right? And we're going to trim, leaving a ½ inch seam allowance in all 3 of these positions. So since it's already pre-folded, it just folds over very easily. You can use a regular rotary cutter or your add a quarter, which makes it really simple. And we are leaving a ½ inch seam allowance beyond that fold. So we're just going to trim off that first side, the second side, and we're going to flip over position number 4, and we're going to trim, leaving a 1/4 inch seam right there. So see that? Just a 1/4 inch left, right where we're going to add the next 3 fabrics. And I'll do the same thing for this one. Now we're not worried about the fabric extending beyond the paper edge all the way around on the outside here and here. Okay, we will trim that up later once we've added all of our fabrics. So you have very little waste. There you go. So we have trimmed up all of those fabrics. Now we're going to take a look. The next position is position number 2, right? We've placed the fabric for number 1. We're moving to position number 2. Now when we flip this over, we're working from the back side. Our position number 2 is now over here, right? Now I know it's going to be really hard to for this to make sense because I'm using just a tea stain muslin, and it's hard to tell which is the right side and the wrong side. So if you just put this down as a mental note, the first fabric is always right side up on the paper foundation. Every fabric we add from here on out, you're going to place with the right side facing down, right? And you might actually it might actually be helpful for you if you do the movement just like I did, right? You can put the piece here with the right side facing up. That's how this piece is going to lay once we sew it on and press it, right? So the right side is facing up, and then we turn it and match up that seam just like this. The point here on the paper foundation should be a mirror image of the point here. See that? So right side facing up, and then we turn it and match up that raw edge, and now it should be right side facing down. I always pick the worst fabrics to use in my tutorials. So this is going to be our first 2 seams, right? We're going to bring this over to the sewing machine, and I'm going to show you how we sew these first 2 seams. So today I'm using a red thread, and I'm kind of hoping that it helps you see where I'm sewing, although usually this line is pretty thin and it's still hard to see, but for video purposes I've switched to a red thread. Now when paper piecing, sewing through the paper, one of the first things we want to do when we come over to our sewing machine and get set up is to lower our stitch length, because that will help us sew through that paper and be able to easily remove the paper once we're done. So I like to start with a stitch that is about a 1.0 on my machine. Now you might find that that is entirely way too small of a stitch, and when you're sewing, your pieces don't really move at all. You might have to make some adjustments from your machine, but a 1.0 is where I'm starting today with my stitch length. So here we are. I have my pieces just like they were over at my pressing board, right? The raw edge is lined up there, and I'm just going to hold it with my fingers so that there's no movement, and I'm going to flip it right over. We're going to be sewing on the line between position number 1 and number 2, and that is this solid line right there. But when I start sewing, because these lines come to the very edge of this piece, I'm going to actually start sewing off into the fabric, and I'm going to sew through all the way to the other side, okay? So there is our first seam. Now I'm going to bring in the next piece, and you'll see the raw edges lined up with both of my pieces. I'm just going to pinch them together and flip them over, and you can sort of just like chain stitch each one of these seams. And you'll just go through and sew that first seam on each one of your units. Once you're done, if you've chain pieced them, you'll just want to cut each one of your units apart, just like that. And I like just to remove any hanging threads. Now, we're working from the paper side at this point, and what I'm going to do is just with a small, light, tiny dab, add just a smidgen of glue in position number 2 and flip over that fabric and just finger press that in place. And then I'm going to take my iron and I'm just going to press that seam. See how quick and easy that is? And now we're ready to add the fabric number 3. So with it flipped over to this side, each one of our fabrics will go right side facing up, just like this. And then we're going to flip right side facing down. The points should match up diagonally just like that. We're going to bring that over to the sewing machine and sew those seams. So coming over here, I'm going to just flip my fabric or my foundation right on over, and I'm going to be sewing from off the paper edge right along that line and off the paper edge. Then I can bring in my next piece, flip it over, and we're just visually lining up the needle in line with that line, right? Then we can come right over here, separate our pieces, and again, we're going to just add just a smidgen of glue, and it does not have to be a lot. I'm being really light-handed with that glue. And we're just flipping that fabric over and pressing those seams. So now we have 3 fabrics added, right? We're going to flip it over and we're going to see that fabric number 4 is next, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to go right side facing up, just like that. And then we're going to flip that with the right side facing down. And we're matching up those raw edges. And it's really important that the corner is diagonal with that corner, right? That's going to help you line up your pieces really accurately, especially with those diamond shapes. And we're going to bring these over to the sewing machine. Coming over here, we're sewing off of the paper edge right onto that line, and then off of the paper edge over here. Now we can just cut these pieces apart, flip it over to this side, add just a smidgen of glue, flip that fabric right over, and press those seams. So once you've added all 4 pieces to each one of these paper foundations, what you want is for fabric to extend beyond all 4 sides of your paper template, right? So it's going to look a little messy and a little crazy, just like this. But you'll see how that fabric goes beyond the paper edge all the way around. Once you have all 4 of your pieces, you can take a regular rotary cutter and we're going to trim all of the extra fabric away. Now, what I like to do, because I might not have cut these out exactly right on that line, right? That is not so important. What's important now when you're trimming all this extra fabric away is that this inside solid line matches up with the 1/4 inch mark on your ruler. So that means that we didn't have to be so exactly precise when cutting these paper templates out, which is really nice. So we're going to match up our 1/4 inch mark on our ruler, nice and straight with that solid line right there. And we can trim these blocks nice and flush all the way around on all 4 sides. So the big reveal here is the paper side, and when we flip it over, look at how nice and neat. And one of the things I love about paper piecing is that everything is very accurate and spot on, right? It's really hard for me, even though I've been sewing and quilting for a really long time, to get this level of preciseness with just traditional regular piecing. It's one of the main reasons why I love paper piecing. So you're going to go through and trim all of your extra fabric up just like this on all 8 pieces. So at this point, here are 4 of my 8 sections, right? They're going to come together to make little hearts just like this. Now you'll see I still have the paper on the back side, right? Sewing through those lines in the paper really secures that paper on there. And at this point, it's going to add a little stability to our project as we are sewing these 2 units together to form one heart unit, right? You could go ahead and remove the paper now if you wanted to, but up until this point, I like to leave the paper on. So I'm going to show you what we're going to do. We're going to take 2 units just like this, and we're going to flip them over and line them up just like this. And I'm going to use that line right there as my seam allowance, and I'm going to sew from off the edge all the way on that line and off the edge, joining these 2 units together to make one heart unit. We're going to do that for all 4 units, right? So let's just come together at the sewing machine and sew these 2 units together. So over here at the sewing machine, now that we have several different layers together and we're joining these 2 units, I am going to increase my stitch length by just a little bit to help feed all of these layers through there, right? I still don't want it super long because it'll be easier to remove the paper if I don't do a very long stitch. But I'm just going to bump it up to a 1.4. We'll see how that goes, and your adjustment might be different. So all I'm going to do is line up these paper edges just like this, right? Look how easy it is. If you leave the paper on, it just stabilizes those fabrics. It's really easy to get them lined up. So I am going to start with a little fabric leader just to help keep my thread from going down into my needle plate. And I'm going to sew right on that line. And I'm going to bring in my next 2 pieces, line them up, and sew right on that line. Once you're done, you'll have 2 more, right? You'll have 4 units all together Today I'm just showing with 2 units. We're going to bring these back over and we're going to separate all of our units and give them a press. So here we are. Here's 2 of our 4 units. And I like to just open them up on the paper side facing up. And I like to work that seam over to one side. And then I'll work it back over to the other side. And the whole time, the paper is really acting as a stabilizer, right? I can really work that seam one side to the next side. And then I'm just going to take and I'm going to open it right up. Just like that. If you have one of those seam rollers, you might find that helpful. But I'm just going to work that seam allowance open, and then we're going to give that a press. Now at this point, I don't like using any steam because the steam can warp your paper and cause your pieces to be a little wonky. So I'm just using a dry iron, nice and hot, and pressing that seam open. While that one cools down, we'll do the same thing with this next piece. Just working that seam one way, working it the other way, and then I'm going to just flip everything over and open up that seam and give that a press. So let me show you the difference of leaving the paper in versus removing the paper, because you could certainly have removed the paper before joining these 2 sections together, right? But you'll find that your pieces might be a little bit more flimsier working with them, but you could certainly do it that way as well. So before we join these 2 pieces, because what's going to happen, let's flip this over, is we're going to make a 4 patch with our 4 part units, right? We're going to have 4 units that come together just like this. Just like that. That creates a 4 patch. To join our 4 patch, we're going to take 2 units and join them together right there with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. We'll have 2 longer units that then come together with this middle seam, right? I'm going to show you both ways. I'm going to show you sewing together the units with the paper removed versus leaving the paper on and having that provided line, right? So before I move on, I'm going to go ahead and just remove the paper from the seam. So I can just take that paper right on out of there. See that? And because we've worked that seam before pressing it, that paper really just pretty easily comes right out of there. If you can grab it. There we go. You could also remove the paper before pressing your seam open if you want. It works the same way. There we go. The only thing about sewing through the paper foundations is you're going to have little tiny pieces of paper all over the place like that. Right? Okay, so let's just bring these together like that. I'm just trying to find the right placement for my pieces. There we go. So here are the 2 with the paper. We're going to flip those over And here are the two without the paper. We're going to flip those over. What we're doing is we're just bringing this to the sewing machine, and because that paper is acting as a stabilizer, to line up those seams, all I have to do is just give it a little tap on my pressing board. Everything is lined up and we're sewing directly on that line. If you have removed the paper, then you have to be really mindful to set up a 1/4 inch seam allowance and make sure you are lining up everything. All of your points are lining up, and you might actually want to pin where all of these seams meet so that it lines up correctly, right? And then set your 1/4 inch seam allowance to sew this seam. So we're going to go ahead and sew this one first, and then I will make sure my seam allowance is set at a 1/4 inch for this one. Okay, I'm just tapping, tapping, tapping. That paper's all lined up. And all I have to do is sew on that line. Again, there's no right way sewing through the paper at this point, or wrong way, removing the paper, whatever way works best for you. I just wanted to show you the different options and what it would be like doing it both ways. So now, let's raise that needle. I'm going to set a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I have to relower my stitch length to a 1.4. And at this point, we just have to make sure that these pieces are nice and lined up. First, nice and straight through here, but also I want to make sure that my 2 points here and here meet up with the pieces that are underneath of it, right? So I just visually pick up my piece. Just going to make sure that those seams are lined up. I'm just going to add a little pin right there. And I think I really only have to add just one pin. When I lined up this first seam, this one just naturally lined up as well. So now we're just sewing with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Once we get right down to that pin, we can take the pin out, make sure everything else all the way, the rest of the way down is lined up, and finish that seam. Okay, coming back, we have our two different sections, right? Here's the one with the paper that's still left on. We can go ahead and work that seam one way and back the other. If you want, you can go ahead and remove the paper now. I don't know why I find it easier to remove this paper after it's pressed. I don't know why, but you can remove it now or wait. You may also, if you have shaky hands like I do, you might also find it helpful to have a little pair of tweezers to help grab these little paper edges. I don't have mine next to me. They're over by the heat press. But you might find it helpful to have a pair of scissors just to grab these little tiny pieces of paper in the seam allowances. And now you can just open up that seam and give that a press. There we go. And flipping that over, you can see how perfectly lined up all of those points are, right? I love that about paper piecing. Coming over to this one where all of the paper has been removed, I'm trying to be mindful not to stretch this out too much, right? But I'm going to open up this seam and just crease it with my fingernail just a little bit. And then we're going to press this seam. I have a habit of wanting to really pull but it'd be real easy to stretch this piece longer than it's supposed to be. So that's just another reason why I kind of like to leave the paper on the back side all the way through. But it's totally up to you. And there we go. I think that's perfectly lined up as well, just using a pin just to line up one of these seams, right? And now at this point, we are just going to join these two sections together in this middle seam, and that will make the top of our trivet, except for the border all the way around. So we're just going to flip that over. Because I still have the paper on at least one of these sides, I'm going to use that line and just sew all the way from one side to the other. Now this bottom piece doesn't have a piece of fabric, so I can't just line and tap them up like this. I have to be really mindful that I'm matching up the seams because the paper has been removed off of this bottom section. So I think the easiest way for me to do it this way would be to match up this middle seam on both units. I'm just going to throw a pin in there just to keep them lined up. Just like that, right? And now I can start at one end and line up the raw edges just like that. And I'm going to sew right on that line all the way down. Coming back to the pressing board. This is going to look a little crazy because one side has paper and one side doesn't, right? I think if you're working like this, you either leave all the paper on or you remove the paper as you go along. Now I'm going to work that seam one way, and then I'm going to flip it over and work the seam the other way, which really doesn't want to work so well because this side does not have paper on it. We're going to make it work. You might find it just helpful to press this seam in one direction, one side or the other. If you want to, you can go ahead and open this seam up and press it flat that way as well. I think I'm going to work that seam open. Which takes me a few minutes. I'm not the greatest at pressing seams open, right? Y'all know that. Where it's really the thickest is right where these intersections come together. And if you're really good at flipping those seams and making them turn right there, you could certainly do that. I'm just going to go ahead and give this a press. And then I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to press from this side too. So this is how we look. Here is the main body, the main portion of our trivet. Isn't that pretty? I love using the scrappy fabrics. Instead of traditionally going like the typical pinks and reds, right? I love doing scrappy hearts. So at this point, all you'd have to do is take a few minutes and just start removing all of this paper, right? And it's just going to take a minute. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And I'm not going to waste your time while you're watching along. But I'm just reaching in and grabbing these papers. You might also find it helpful to have a little pokey tool like this one. I got this at the Dollar Tree. It's just a little pointy stylus. And I find it really helpful. I can just run it along that seam, reach in and grab my papers. See that? You can also do the same thing with like a toothpick. So let me go remove all of these papers and We'll be right back. Okay, now that I have all of the paper removed from the back side, see, there you go. And I've given it a good little press. She's laying down nice and flat. We're ready to add the borders to make this into a trivet. So we're going to add our first two borders. The measurements for these borders are on the first page of this pattern. And you can add them to the left and right or to the top and bottom. It does not matter which order. You're going to add your first two sides, and then we're going to add the second two sides. So come with me to the sewing machine as we add these first two sides. Coming back over here, I'm just going to give these seams a quick press. And you can press these seams open if you like, but I'm going to go ahead and just flip them right over and press my seam to the side. That seam is actually going towards our little border. We'll flip it over this way, flip over that border. I'm getting a shadow. It's later in the afternoon. The sun does some weird things in my studio. All right, so we have our first two sides on, and then we can add the other two sides. And those will go there and there. So I'm going to go ahead and add those, and we'll be right back. And there we go. Isn't that just so cute with the darker brown border like that? So there we go. One of the things I want to point out, since we did the paper piecing and the piecing was spot on perfect, I did not lose any of my points at the very tips of my hearts or at the very bottom tips. See that? I did not lose any points, and I absolutely love that. So that's a benefit. Even though you're removing paper and prepping pieces and all that stuff, if you have a hard time with being precise with your piecing, you might want to try paper piecing. So there is the top of our trivet. So at this point, all we have left to do, if you wanted to just make this a simple wall quilt, you could use one layer of batting, right? But because I want to use this as a trivet, I actually want to use this to be able to set like a casserole on it. I'm going to double up my layers of batting. Let me zoom out just a little tiny bit. There we go. That's a little bit better. So what I have here is 2 layers of warm and natural batting, and I have my back fabric with the right side facing down. Now, what's great about this project is you could trim the back fabric away completely flush with your batting, and you could add a traditional binding if you wanted to, right? Now, to speed up this process of finishing this trivet, I'm going to use the back fabric as my binding for this particular one. And so I have a 1-inch extra overhang of my backing fabric all the way around. And all of the measurements are in the description box for pre-cutting all of these pieces. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to glue baste all of my layers. I just want to add a little tiny bit of glue so these layers just stay in place. And right on top, I'm going to put the top of my trivet. And then I'm going to dry all of this glue with a good hot iron so we are not sewing through any wet glue, just like that. Now, you could go ahead and quilt your trivet at this point without doing your binding. When I'm doing smaller projects like this, I tend to stay much more square if I go ahead and just turn that binding over now, and the first thing that I sew down will be that binding. I know that's totally backwards, and for most of you, you're going to think that's not the right way to do it, Lisa. It's just the way that I do it. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this self-binding right over and glue base that in place all the way around. I do have a full tutorial explaining a lot slower how I fold over and do a self-binding. You can find that video here on my channel. All I'm doing is just using a glue stick, making my first fold, and then using the glue stick again, folding it a second time, and just work my way all the way around. This is a very, very fast way to do a binding on smaller projects just like this. So here we are. My binding is pre-folded. That will be the first thing that I stitch down when we go over to the sewing machine. So I'm going to change the color of my thread because I don't necessarily want to use a red thread. And I'm going to bring you along as I stitch down the binding. And I want to do some really, really simple quilting with this, y'all. Maybe a stitch in the ditch. I haven't quite decided, but I'm going to keep it really simple. I do want to secure the layers though, because we have a pretty wide block here. And I know that using this as a trivet, I will more than likely be washing this several times. So I do want to secure the layers of the batting in the middle. So come with me as I stitch down the binding and do a little bit of quilting. Coming over here to the sewing machine, I'm going to be sewing down my binding first, which is totally backwards. Usually we do the binding the very last thing, right, to finish up a project. I just find that my projects, when smaller like this, tend to stay a little bit more square if I just go ahead and sew that binding down first. For the quilting, I've decided to do a really simple straight stitch. The stitch length that I'm using is a 2.4, and I'm just going right inside that border all the way around. And then I'm going to do a simple straight stitch around the heart designs right in the background fabric. Trying to stay off of the different colors that I've used, keeping that stitch right in the background. Although this is a very simple quilting, it's definitely going to give me some nice quilty texture and do its job of securing all of the 2 layers of batting, the top and the back fabric, so I can use this trivet for years and years to come. Very, very simple. So here we are, all done with the quilting. And all I have left to do is to trim some of these little threads where I started at different places. And then she is all done. How cute is that, right? Very simple quilting. Very, very simple, but enough quilting to keep all of these layers in place. I know that's going to be hard to see on this side because my thread just really blends in. but plenty of quilting to keep all of these layers in place to give it some nice quilty texture and to ensure that I'll be able to use this over and over and throw it in the wash whenever I need to. Now I know today's video was a little bit on the longer side. Sometimes I see a video and I'm like, wow, that video is super long. But if you see a longer video, if you view it more as like, I'm attending a class today, we tend to view that as more valuable, right? Versus just watching a longer YouTube video. Maybe if you view it as a class, the time will just fly by and you get all of the knowledge from the class, right? I hope that you are inspired by this project. If you make this, I would love to see it. Feel free to share pictures with me over on the Creative Crew on Facebook. There's a link to Creative Crew down below. And yeah, I would love to see the fabrics you pick out for this trivet. And yeah, it would be great to see your trivets over there. If you have any questions, feel free to jump down below this video. And if you haven't already subscribed, that would be lovely. And if you give this video a thumbs up, even though it's longer and paper piecing might not be your thing, I would appreciate the thumbs up. Okay, everybody, I will see y'all really soon. Stay warm if it's cold outside. Stay dry if it's wet outside. And we'll see you really soon, okay? Thanks for watching, everybody. Bye.